I was doing laps in my pool on a Tuesday morning when the police cruiser pulled into my driveway, and I knew immediately that Patricia Henderson had finally lost whatever remaining grip she had on reality. The water was perfect that day, exactly 78 degrees, and I had been enjoying my routine morning swim before heading to my home office. I owned a software consulting business that let me work remotely, which was one of the main reasons I had purchased this property in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 years ago. The house sat on 2 acres of pristine desert land, complete with a custom-built infinity pool that overlooked the mountains. Every square inch of it was mine, purchased with my own money, sitting on land that belonged solely to me according to the deed locked in my safe. I pulled myself out of the pool and grabbed my towel as Officer Martinez stepped out of his vehicle, looking uncomfortable in the morning heat. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, and he had the expression of someone who already knew this call was going to be a waste of time. "Good morning, officer," I said, wrapping the towel around my waist. "Let me guess. Patricia Henderson called you," he nodded, glancing down at his notepad. "Yes, sir. We received a complaint about illegal swimming activity on HOA property. The caller stated that you were trespassing and using community facilities without authorization." He looked up at my house, then at the pool, then back at me. "But this is your private residence, correct?" "It absolutely is," I said, water still dripping from my hair. "Come on inside. I'll show you the property deed, the pool installation permits, and everything else you need to see. This is the 3rd time this month Patricia has called the police on me for completely fabricated reasons." Officer Martinez followed me through the sliding glass doors into my kitchen. I left wet footprints on the tile as I walked to my office and retrieved the folder I had started keeping specifically for situations like this. Inside were copies of my property deed, the survey showing my property boundaries, the permits for the pool construction, and a growing collection of documentation related to Patricia's harassment. "Here's the deed," I said, spreading the documents on my kitchen counter. "As you can see, I own 2 full acres here. The property line extends well beyond the pool area. There is no HOA property involved whatsoever." Martinez examined the documents carefully, taking photos with his phone. "Mr. Davidson, can you explain the situation with the HOA?" The caller was very insistent that this property falls under their jurisdiction. I sighed and poured myself a glass of water. "That's the thing, officer, it doesn't. When I bought this land, it was specifically sold as non-HOA property. That was a major selling point for me. I had lived under an HOA before and wanted nothing to do with another one. This property has never been part of the Desert Vista HOA, despite what Patricia claims." "Who is Patricia Henderson exactly?" "She's the president of the Desert Vista HOA, which governs the neighborhood about half a mile down the road," I explained. "Her development is called Desert Vista Estates. My property is not part of that development. It was a separate parcel that predates their community by about 15 years. But Patricia seems to have convinced herself that because my driveway connects to a road that runs along the edge of their community, I somehow fall under her authority." Officer Martinez frowned. "Has she provided any documentation supporting her claim?" "Never. Every time she makes an accusation, it's based on nothing but her own assertion that I must be part of the HOA. I've showed her these documents multiple times. She ignores them completely." I pulled out another section of my folder. "Here are the previous police reports from her other calls. 2 weeks ago, she claimed I was operating an illegal business from my home because a delivery truck dropped off some equipment. Before that, she reported me for having an unapproved mailbox, even though my mailbox is on my private property and has nothing to do with her community standards." The officer scanned through the reports, shaking his head. "This is clearly a pattern. Mr. Davidson, you're not in any trouble here. Your documentation is solid. However, I'd recommend filing a harassment complaint if this continues." "I've been considering it," I admitted. "But I kept hoping she'd eventually realize she has no authority over me and move on. Apparently, that was wishful thinking. After Officer Martinez left, I tried to get back to work, but I was too irritated to concentrate. The encounter had eaten up 45 minutes of my morning, and I had a video conference scheduled with a client in an hour. I changed into dry clothes and sat down at my computer, but my mind kept drifting back to Patricia and her escalating behavior. The thing was, I had tried to be reasonable with her from the start. When I first moved in, Patricia had shown up at my door with a welcome basket and a packet of HOA rules. I had politely explained that I wasn't part of the HOA, and she had smiled tightly and said there must have been some mistake. When I showed her my deed, she had argued that the previous owner must have made an illegal sale, that it was impossible for property in this area to exist outside the HOA boundaries. I had pointed out that my house had been built in 1998, while Desert Vista Estates had only been developed in 2013. But she had simply shaken her head and insisted I would need to register with the HOA properly. That conversation had been 3 years ago, and things had only gotten worse since then. Patricia seemed to take my refusal to submit to her authority as a personal insult. She had sent me dozens of violation notices for everything from the color of my window shutters to the height of my desert landscaping plants. Each time, I had thrown the notices away since they had no legal standing. Each time, she had become more aggressive in her approach. The swimming pool had become her latest obsession. I had installed it 2 years ago after obtaining all the proper permits from Maricopa County. The construction had taken 3 months, and the result was spectacular. The infinity edge seemed to blend seamlessly with the desert horizon, and the saltwater system kept the water crystal clear without the harsh chemical smell of traditional chlorine pools. It was my favorite feature of the entire property, and I used it almost every single day. Patricia had sent me a cease and desist letter within a week of the pool's completion. The letter claimed that I had built the pool on HOA common property and demanded that I either remove it or pay a $15,000 fee to the HOA for unauthorized use of community land. I had responded with a letter from my attorney, along with a copy of the survey showing that the pool was entirely within my property boundaries. Patricia had ignored it completely and continued sending notices demanding payment. Now she had apparently decided to escalate to calling the police every time she saw me using my own pool. It was insane, but I wasn't sure what legal recourse I had beyond what Officer Martinez had suggested. Filing a harassment complaint felt like stooping to her level, but I was running out of patience. My video conference went smoothly, despite my distracted state of mind. The client was a startup in Austin that needed help scaling their infrastructure, and we spent an hour discussing their architecture and pain points. Work was actually going very well. My business had grown significantly over the past year, and I was making more money than I ever had as a traditional employee. The freedom to work from home, swim in my pool during breaks, and enjoy the Arizona sunshine was exactly the lifestyle I had envisioned when I bought this property. After the conference, I made lunch and decided to do some work from my patio. The weather was perfect, hovering around 85 degrees with a light breeze. I was reviewing some code on my laptop when I heard a vehicle approaching. I looked up to see a white sedan pulling into my driveway, and my stomach sank when Patricia Henderson emerged from the driver's seat. She was exactly what you would picture when someone said, HOA president. Patricia was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in a severe bob, oversized sunglasses, and a pantsuit that seemed wildly impractical for the Arizona heat. She carried a large binder under her arm and wore an expression of righteous determination as she marched toward my patio. "We need to talk," she announced, not bothering with any greeting. "Your behavior this morning was completely unacceptable." I closed my laptop and stood up. "Patricia, you need to leave my property. I've asked you multiple times not to come here." I have every right to inspect HOA properties for violations, she said, opening her binder and pulling out a stack of papers. And this property has numerous violations that need to be addressed immediately. First and foremost, your unauthorized use of the community pool. Patricia, for the last time, this is not a community pool. This is my private pool on my private property, which is not part of your HOA. I've shown you the deed. I've shown you the survey. I've had my attorney send you a letter. What part of this are you not understanding? She jabbed a finger at one of her papers. According to HOA bylaws established in 2013, all properties within a 1-mile radius of the Desert Vista Estate's main entrance fall under HOA jurisdiction for the purposes of maintaining community standards and property values. Your property falls within that radius. I stared at her in disbelief. That's not how property law works. You can't just write bylaws that claim authority over property you don't own. My deed predates your HOA by 15 years. Your organization has absolutely no legal standing here. We'll see what a judge has to say about that, Patricia snapped. I'm filing a lawsuit against you for theft of HOA resources, trespassing, and violation of community standards. You'll be hearing from our attorney within the week. Your attorney is going to tell you that you're wasting everyone's time and money, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. But go ahead, file your lawsuit. I'll be happy to show up in court with my documentation and watch you embarrass yourself. Patricia's face flushed red. You think you're so special, don't you? You think the rules don't apply to you just because you have some money and a fancy pool. Well, I've got news for you. This is a community that values order and respect for authority. You don't get to just do whatever you want without consequences. On my own property, I absolutely do get to do whatever I want as long as it's legal and permitted, I replied. Which everything I've done is. You're not my authority, Patricia. You have no power over me or my property. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can all move on with our lives. She slammed her binder shut. We'll see about that. And in the meantime, I'm reporting you to the county for illegal construction of a swimming pool on protected desert land. I'm sure they'll be very interested to learn that you built that monstrosity without considering the environmental impact. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I had started keeping photos and videos of Patricia's visits. I'm recording this conversation, Patricia. You've just threatened to file a false report with the county, which is itself illegal. I have all the proper permits for this pool, and you know it because I've showed them to you before. If you file a false report, I'll be pressing charges for harassment and filing a restraining order. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't intimidate me with your threats. I'm protecting this community from people like you who think they're above the law. Leave my property now, or I'm calling the police, I said firmly. You're trespassing. She glared at me for a long moment, then turned on her heel and marched back to her car. I watched until she drove away, then sat back down and tried to calm my racing heart. My hands were shaking slightly as I saved the video to my cloud storage. This was getting out of control. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Arizona harassment laws and looking up attorneys who specialized in property disputes. The situation with Patricia had crossed the line from annoying to genuinely concerning. Her threat to file false reports with the county was serious, and I needed to be prepared to defend myself legally if she followed through. That evening, I called my friend Derek, who was an attorney in Phoenix, though his specialty was contract law rather than property disputes. I explained the situation while sitting by my pool, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Man, that's crazy, Derek said after I finished. I've heard horror stories about HOA overreach, but this is next level. She really thinks she has authority over your property? She seems completely convinced of it, I replied. I don't know if she's delusional or if she's just so used to having power in her little development that she can't accept that her authority has limits. Probably a combination of both, Derek said. HOA board members can get drunk on power, especially when they're not used to being told no. The fact that she's threatening to file false reports is a serious problem, though. You need to document everything and be prepared to get a restraining order if necessary. That's what I was thinking. Can you recommend anyone who handles this kind of case? Derek gave me the names of 2 attorneys he knew who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Call them tomorrow and set up consultations. You want someone who's aggressive and won't be intimidated by threats of lawsuits. Most of the time, these HOA cases don't actually make it to court because the HOA's attorney realizes they have no case. But you need representation to make it clear you're serious about defending your rights. I thanked him and ended the call, then sat by the pool for a while longer, enjoying the cool evening air. It frustrated me that Patricia was forcing me to spend time and money on attorneys when I should be focusing on my business and enjoying my property. But I wasn't going to let her bully me into submission. The next morning, I was up early for my usual swim. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I did my laps slowly, trying to clear my mind and focus on the peaceful rhythm of the strokes. Swimming had always been meditative for me, a way to process stress and start the day with a clear head. I was about halfway through my routine when I heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. I stopped mid-lap and looked toward my driveway to see 2 police cruisers and a vehicle from the Maricopa County Code Enforcement Office pulling up to my house. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, swimming to the edge and pulling myself out. I grabbed my towel and walked toward the driveway where 4 people were getting out of their vehicles. I recognized Officer Martinez from yesterday, along with another police officer and 2 people in county uniforms. "Mr. Davidson," Officer Martinez said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We received a report that you've constructed an illegal swimming pool on protected desert land without proper permits or environmental assessment. We need to inspect the property and see documentation." "Patricia Henderson filed a false report," I said flatly. "I have all the proper permits." "Give me 5 minutes to get them." The code enforcement officers, a man and woman both in their 40s, exchanged glances. The woman spoke up. "Sir, we have to take all reports seriously. If you have the documentation, this should be quick." I led the group into my house, leaving a trail of water across the floor as I went to my office. I pulled out the full permit file, which included not just the county building permits, but also the environmental assessment that had been required before construction. The assessment had confirmed that the pool location was not on protected habitat and had been approved without any issues. "Here," I said, handing the folder to the code enforcement officer. "Building permit, environmental assessment, electrical permit, plumbing permit, and the final inspection approval. Everything was done by the book." The woman reviewed the documents carefully, flipping through each page. "These all appear to be in order. The environmental assessment is properly filed and approved. Can you show us the actual property boundaries?" We walked outside, and I pointed out the survey stakes that marked my property lines. The pool was well within my boundaries, with at least 50 feet of clearance on all sides. The code enforcement officers took photos and notes, while Officer Martinez stood by looking increasingly annoyed. "Mr. Davidson, your property is completely legal and properly permitted," the male code enforcement officer said. "Someone has wasted everyone's time this morning with a false report." "Do you know who filed the complaint?" "Patricia Henderson, president of the Desert Vista HOA," I said. "She was here yesterday afternoon threatening to do exactly this. I have video of the conversation." The female officer frowned. "This is a serious matter." "Filing false reports with code enforcement is a misdemeanor offense. Do you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately to make Patricia face consequences for her actions. But another part of me worried that pressing charges would only escalate the situation further. "Can I think about it and let you know?" I asked. "I'm considering getting a restraining order as well, and I'd like to consult with my attorney first about the best approach." "That's reasonable," she said, handing me a business card. "Call me within 72 hours if you want to move forward with charges. In the meantime, we'll be documenting this as a false report in our system." After everyone left, I stood by my pool and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. It wasn't even 8 in the morning, and I had already dealt with a police visit and a code enforcement inspection. This was exactly the kind of drama I had wanted to avoid by buying non-HOA property. I got dressed and immediately called the first attorney on Derek's list. Her name was Jennifer Morrison, and her firm specialized in HOA disputes and property law. Her secretary was able to squeeze me in for a consultation that same afternoon. Jennifer's office was in Scottsdale, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Camelback Mountain. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a sharp business suit with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She invited me into her office and listened intently as I explained the entire situation with Patricia, from the initial welcome basket 3 years ago to this morning's code enforcement visit. "You have documentation of all these incidents?" Jennifer asked, taking notes on her tablet. "Everything," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've got copies of every violation notice she's sent me, photos and videos of her trespassing on my property, copies of the police reports and recordings of our conversations. I started documenting everything about 6 months ago when I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own." "Smart," she said approvingly. "That's going to make our case much stronger. Now, let me be clear about what we're dealing with here. This woman has no legal authority over your property whatsoever. The fact that she's continuing to harass you, despite being shown clear evidence of your ownership and permits, suggests either severe incompetence or malicious intent. Either way, you have grounds for a harassment case and possibly a restraining order." "What about her threat to sue me?" I asked. "She said she was filing a lawsuit for theft of HOA resources." Jennifer smiled grimly. "Let her try. Any competent judge would throw that case out immediately, and her attorney would likely advise her not to file it in the first place. But if she does file, we'll countersue for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. The discovery process alone would be devastating for her, because we'd subpoena all the HOA records and communications. I'm guessing we'd find a pattern of this kind of overreach. So what do you recommend? First, I'm going to send her a cease and desist letter on behalf of the firm. This will be strongly worded, citing all the relevant laws she's violating and making it clear that any further harassment will result in immediate legal action. Second, I want you to press charges for the false code enforcement report. That establishes a criminal record of her behavior and strengthens our position if we need to pursue a restraining order. Third, we're going to file a harassment complaint with the court and begin the process of getting a formal order of protection. I felt relieved hearing someone lay out a clear plan of action. What's the timeline on all this? The cease and desist letter will go out today. I'll draft it as soon as we're done here. The criminal complaint can be filed today, as well if you call code enforcement right now and tell them you want to proceed. The harassment complaint will take a few days to prepare properly, and then we'll file it with the court. You should expect a hearing within 2 to 3 weeks. And if she violates the cease and desist, then we have even more ammunition for the restraining order and potentially more criminal charges depending on what she does. Mr. Davidson, I've handled cases like this before. HOA presidents who overstep their authority usually back down as soon as they face real legal consequences. The letter from an attorney often does the trick. But in cases where the person is truly irrational, the restraining order is usually enough to stop the behavior. I hired Jennifer on the spot and called code enforcement from her office to formally press charges for the false report. The officer I spoke with said they would forward the case to the county attorney's office for prosecution. It felt strange to be taking such serious legal action, but I knew it was necessary. Patricia had left me no choice. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work and maintain my normal routine. I continued my morning swims, half expecting Patricia to show up with more police officers or county officials. But my driveway remained empty, and my phone stayed quiet except for normal work calls. Jennifer emailed me a copy of the cease and desist letter she had sent to Patricia. It was 5 pages of dense legal language, but the core message was clear. Stop all contact with my client, stop filing false reports, stop trespassing on his property, and stop making false claims about HOA authority over land you don't own. The letter cited specific statutes about harassment, trespassing, and filing false police reports. It demanded that Patricia preserve all HOA records related to me and warned that any destruction of records would be considered spoliation of evidence. That should get her attention, Jennifer wrote in her email. I sent copies to the HOA's registered attorney and to the HOA board members, so everyone is aware of the situation. 3 days after the letter was sent, I was working at my desk when my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Nathan Davidson?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Robert Chambers. I'm on the board of directors for the Desert Vista HOA. I'm calling to apologize for Patricia Henderson's behavior and to assure you that the board does not support her actions regarding your property." I sat back in my chair, surprised. "I appreciate you calling. Can I ask what prompted this?" "We received the letter from your attorney," Robert said, sounding tired. "Most of us had no idea what Patricia was doing. She's been conducting what she calls enforcement actions without bringing them to the board for approval. When we saw the letter and started asking questions, we discovered she's been harassing you for years based on a completely false claim that your property is part of the HOA. Did she really think she had authority over my land?" "I don't know if she genuinely believed it or if she was just on a power trip," Robert said. "But either way, it's unacceptable. The board held an emergency meeting last night and we've voted to remove Patricia as president. We're also retaining our own attorney to review all of her actions as president to see if there are other problems we don't know about." "That's a significant step," I said, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy for the board members who were dealing with this mess. It had to be done. "Patricia has exposed the HOA to serious legal liability with her actions. Your attorney's letter made it very clear that we could be sued as an organization if we don't take immediate corrective action. Beyond that, it's just the right thing to do. You've done nothing wrong and you've been harassed for years. I'm truly sorry about that." "I appreciate the apology," I said, "and I'm glad the board is taking this seriously. To be clear, I have no issue with the HOA as an organization. My only problem has been with Patricia's behavior." "Understood. I want to assure you that you won't be receiving any more violation notices or visits from HOA representatives. We've sent an internal memo to all board members and to our property management company making it clear that your property is not part of the HOA and should not be contacted for any reason." After the call ended, I immediately emailed Jennifer to let her know about the conversation. She replied within an hour, saying this was a positive development, but that we should still proceed with the harassment complaint against Patricia personally. The fact that she had been removed from her position didn't erase what she had done. The criminal charges for filing the false code enforcement report moved forward quickly. I received a call from a prosecutor at the county attorney's office who wanted to interview me about the incident. I met with her at the county courthouse, bringing all my documentation. She was a sharp young attorney named Sarah Chen, and she seemed genuinely angry on my behalf as I explained the situation. "This is a clear-cut case," Sarah said after reviewing everything. "Miss Henderson filed a report claiming you had built an illegal structure without permits, when in fact you had all the proper permits and she knew it because you had shown them to her. That's filing a false report, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor. We're going to prosecute." What happens next? I asked. We'll issue a summons for her to appear in court. She'll be formally charged and she'll have the option to plead guilty or go to trial. Given the evidence, I'd expect her attorney to advise her to take a plea deal. For a first offense, she's looking at probation, a fine, and possibly community service. But she'll have a criminal record, which might make her think twice before harassing anyone else. The hearing for my harassment complaint was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I enjoyed the first period of peace I'd had in months. There were no violation notices in my mailbox, no angry HOA presidents showing up at my door, no police visits to deal with. I swam every morning without anxiety, worked productively throughout the day, and actually felt like I could relax in my own home. Jennifer called me the day before the hearing to prepare. The judge is going to want to hear your testimony about the pattern of harassment. Be specific, stick to the facts, and don't embellish or get emotional. Just explain what happened when it happened and how it affected you. I'll walk you through the timeline and the evidence. This should be straightforward. The courthouse was busy when I arrived the next morning. Jennifer met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking confident and professional. Patricia is here with her attorney, she said quietly. They know they're fighting an uphill battle. Don't be surprised if they try to approach you to settle. Sure enough, about 15 minutes before we were scheduled to go before the judge, Patricia's attorney approached us. He was an older man in an expensive suit, and he looked deeply uncomfortable. Miss Morrison, Mr. Davidson, he said with a nod. I'm Richard Klein, representing Miss Henderson. I'd like to propose a settlement before we go in front of the judge. I'm listening, Jennifer said neutrally. Miss Henderson is willing to agree to a permanent no-contact order. She will not contact Mr. Davidson in any way, will not approach his property, and will not file any reports or complaints about him with any agency or organization. In exchange, Mr. Davidson would agree not to pursue any civil damages. I looked at Jennifer, who raised an eyebrow. That's not much of a settlement, Mr. Klein. We're not asking for damages in this proceeding. We're asking for an order of protection based on a clear pattern of harassment. Your client's agreement to stop doing things she should never have been doing in the first place isn't exactly a concession. Klein shifted uncomfortably. Miss Henderson has already faced consequences. She's been removed from her position as HOA president, and she's facing criminal charges for the false report. Surely that's sufficient. Those are consequences for her actions, not compensation for my client's suffering, Jennifer said. Mr. Davidson has spent 3 years dealing with constant harassment. He's had to hire an attorney, press criminal charges, and file this complaint just to get her to stop. Why should he give up his right to pursue damages? What damages are we talking about? Klein asked warily. Jennifer looked at me and I nodded. We had discussed this beforehand. Emotional distress, attorney's fees, and lost productivity due to the constant interruptions and stress. We're prepared to file a civil suit seeking $25,000 in compensatory damages. Klein's face went pale. That's excessive. It's actually quite reasonable given the circumstances, Jennifer said. But we're willing to settle for $15,000, plus the permanent no-contact order, plus a written apology from Miss Henderson acknowledging that she had no authority over Mr. Davidson's property and that her actions were wrong. Klein excused himself and went to confer with Patricia, who was sitting on a bench farther down the hallway. I could see them having an intense, whispered conversation. Patricia's face was red, and she kept shaking her head. Finally, Klein came back looking defeated. Miss Henderson agrees to the terms, $15,000, permanent no-contact order, and a written apology. She'll pay the settlement in monthly installments over 12 months. 6 months, Jennifer countered. And the first payment is due within 10 days. If she misses any payment, the full amount becomes due immediately, and we reserve the right to pursue additional damages. After some more back and forth, they agreed. We spent the next hour in a conference room drafting the settlement agreement. Patricia signed it without looking at me, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. The written apology was brief but clear. She acknowledged that my property was not part of the HOA, that she had no authority over my land or activities, and that her repeated harassment had been wrong and caused me distress. When it was all done, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anticlimax. 3 years of harassment had come down to a settlement agreement and a written apology. It didn't feel like enough, but at the same time, I was glad to have it over with. "This is a good outcome," Jennifer said as we left the courthouse. "You've got legal protection, financial compensation, and a formal acknowledgement that you were in the right. And she's still facing criminal charges for the false report, so there are real consequences for her actions." The criminal case against Patricia moved through the system over the next 2 months. As Sarah Chen had predicted, Patricia's attorney advised her to take a plea deal rather than go to trial. She pleaded guilty to filing a false report and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, a $1,000 fine, and 80 hours of community service. She also had to attend anger management classes. I wasn't present at her sentencing, but Sarah called me afterward to let me know the outcome. "The judge made it very clear that she was lucky to avoid jail time," Sarah said. "He told her that filing false reports wastes valuable government resources and undermines public trust in code enforcement. He also noted that this was part of a pattern of harassment, which he found deeply troubling." Life slowly returned to normal after that. I received my first settlement payment from Patricia right on schedule. The check came with no note, just a plain envelope with a return address. Each month after that, like clockwork, another payment arrived. I deposited them without ceremony and tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. My morning swims became peaceful again. The sunrise over the mountains, the cool water, the quiet rhythm of the strokes. It was everything I had wanted when I bought this property. I didn't have to worry about police showing up or code enforcement inspecting my permits. I could just enjoy my home. About 4 months after the settlement, I received an unexpected phone call from Robert Chambers, the HOA board member who had called to apologize. We had exchanged a few emails since then as the board worked through the process of reviewing Patricia's actions, but I hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Nathan, I wanted to give you an update on what we discovered during our investigation of Patricia's tenure as president," Robert said. "It turns out your situation wasn't unique. She was harassing multiple people both inside and outside the HOA. "Really?" I said, surprised. "I thought I was special." Robert laughed dryly. "You were the worst case, but there were others." She was fining people within the HOA for minor violations without proper notice or due process. She was threatening homeowners with liens if they didn't immediately comply with her demands. And she was apparently trying to expand the HOA's boundaries by claiming authority over several other properties that weren't part of the development. "That's insane. How did she think she would get away with it?" "I think she genuinely believed she was in the right," Robert said. She had convinced herself that she was protecting property values and maintaining standards. In her mind, the ends justified the means. But the reality is that she was violating people's rights and exposing the HOA to massive legal liability. What's the HOA doing about it? We've had to settle several complaints from homeowners within the community who were improperly fined or threatened. We've also sent letters to the other property owners she was harassing, apologizing and making it clear that we have no authority over their land. And we've completely overhauled our enforcement procedures to make sure this never happens again. All enforcement actions now have to be approved by a majority of the board, and we've hired a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations. "That sounds like a lot of work," I said. "It has been, but it's necessary." Patricia's actions damaged the reputation of the HOA and cost us a lot of money in legal fees and settlements. We're trying to rebuild trust with the community and operate the way an HOA should be operated, which is by focusing on actual community needs and following proper procedures. I appreciated Robert's transparency and the effort the board was making to fix the problems. It reminded me that HOAs themselves weren't inherently bad. It was the people running them who could make them nightmares or functional community organizations. The months passed, and my business continued to thrive. I picked up several new clients and had to hire a contractor to help with the increased workload. The money from Patricia's settlement payments went into a fund I earmarked for property improvements. I used some of it to upgrade my pool's filtration system and add some new landscaping around the perimeter of my land. One morning, about 8 months after the settlement, I was swimming laps when I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. My stomach clenched instinctively, but when I looked up, I saw it was a delivery truck. The driver got out and walked toward me with a clipboard. "Nathan Davidson?" he asked. "That's me," I said, pulling myself out of the pool. "I've got a delivery for you. Big one. Where do you want it?" The delivery turned out to be the new outdoor furniture I had ordered for my patio. The driver and his assistant spent 20 minutes unloading everything and setting it up where I directed. When they left, I stood on my patio admiring the new setup. It looked perfect against the backdrop of the pool and the mountains beyond. I made myself some coffee and sat down in one of the new chairs, feeling deeply content. This was exactly what I had envisioned when I bought this property. Peace, privacy, and the freedom to enjoy my own land without someone constantly looking over my shoulder and inventing problems. My phone buzzed with an email from one of my clients. There was an urgent issue that needed attention, something about server configurations that weren't behaving as expected. I spent the next few hours troubleshooting remotely, communicating with the client's IT team, and eventually identifying the problem as a configuration file that had been accidentally overwritten during an update. Work done. I decided to reward myself with an afternoon swim. The water was perfectly warm, heated by both the pool's heating system and the Arizona sun. I floated on my back, staring up at the cloudless blue sky, and thought about how far things had come in the past year. Patricia's final settlement payment arrived the following month. I deposited the check and sent a brief email to Jennifer Morrison thanking her for her help with the case. She replied congratulating me on seeing it through to the end and saying I should call her if I ever needed legal assistance in the future. I never heard from Patricia again. The no-contact order remained in effect, and apparently she was abiding by it. I occasionally wondered what she was doing with her time now that she wasn't HOA president, but mostly I just felt grateful that she was out of my life. About a year after everything was resolved, I was at a local coffee shop in Scottsdale when I ran into Robert Chambers. We chatted for a few minutes, and he updated me on the HOA's progress. "Things are going really well," he said. "We've got a new president who actually understands how to work collaboratively with homeowners. Violation rates are down because people feel like they're being treated fairly. And we've had 0 legal complaints since we implemented the new procedures." "That's great to hear," I said sincerely. I have to say, as terrible as the situation with Patricia was, it ended up being a wake-up call for the whole community. We were coasting along letting one person make all the decisions without oversight. Now we're actually functioning like a proper board of directors, and the community is better for it. I left the coffee shop feeling oddly optimistic. Bad situations could sometimes lead to positive changes, even if the process of getting there was painful. My life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was steady and profitable, I was sleeping well, and I was swimming every single day. The pool remained my favorite feature of the property, and I never took it for granted. Every morning when I dove into the water, I felt grateful that I had stood my ground and refused to let Patricia bully me off my own land. I occasionally received messages from Derek checking in on how things were going. I always told him the same thing. Everything was great, the legal issues were resolved, and I was finally enjoying the peaceful life I had bought this property for. One evening, I was sitting by the pool watching the sunset when I received an unexpected friend request on social media. It was from someone named Margaret Patterson, and her message explained that she was dealing with a similar situation to what I had experienced. Her HOA president was claiming authority over her property, even though her land wasn't part of the HOA. She had found a news article about my case and was reaching out for advice. I spent an hour writing her a detailed response, explaining the steps I had taken and emphasizing the importance of documentation and getting proper legal representation early. I also sent her Jennifer Morrison's contact information and encouraged her to reach out. Margaret thanked me profusely and said she felt much better knowing that someone else had successfully fought back against HOA overreach. That exchange reminded me that while my situation had been resolved, there were probably countless other people dealing with similar issues. HOAs could be beneficial when properly managed, but they could also be sources of tremendous stress and conflict when leadership abused their authority. I thought about writing a blog post or article about my experience to help others who might be searching for information about HOA disputes. But ultimately, I decided I'd rather just put the whole thing behind me and focus on enjoying my life. If people reached out for advice like Margaret had, I'd be happy to help. But I didn't need to make fighting HOAs into a crusade. 2 years after the settlement, I was swimming laps one morning when I had a moment of clarity. I realized I hadn't thought about Patricia or the HOA drama in months. It had completely faded into the background of my memory, just another challenge I had faced and overcome. The property felt entirely mine now, without any shadow of conflict or stress. I had added some improvements over those 2 years. Solar panels on the roof to offset my energy costs. A new outdoor kitchen area by the pool, desert landscaping that required minimal water but looked beautiful year-round. Each improvement felt like a further claiming of my space, a declaration that this was my home and I would develop it as I saw fit. My business had grown to the point where I had 3 regular contractors working for me and was considering hiring a full-time employee. The freedom to work from home while building something successful was everything I had hoped it would be. The pool breaks during the workday helped me think through complex problems and return to my computer refreshed and ready to tackle whatever challenges arose. I started dating someone I met through a hiking group, a woman named Rachel who was a landscape architect. She loved the property and gave me ideas for additional improvements that would blend even better with the natural desert environment. We talked about the Patricia situation once, early in our relationship, and Rachel was appropriately outraged on my behalf. But after that, it never really came up again. It was ancient history. Life moved forward in the way it does when you're happy and busy. Seasons changed, though in Arizona the changes were subtle compared to other parts of the country. I marked time by client projects completed, improvements made to the property, and the steady rhythm of my daily swims. The legal documents from the case against Patricia stayed in a file in my office, rarely looked at, but kept as a reminder that I had stood up for my rights and won. The settlement money had long since been spent on property improvements, and the written apology was tucked away in a folder I never opened. What mattered was that the harassment had stopped completely. The no-contact order had done its job. I never saw Patricia, never received any communication from her, and never heard any rumors about her causing trouble for anyone else. Whether she had learned from her mistakes or simply found other ways to occupy her time, I didn't know and didn't care. The Desert Vista HOA continued operating under new leadership, and from what I heard through Robert Chambers, they were functioning well. They had their challenges like any community organization, but they were handling them professionally and legally. The days of one person wielding unchecked power were over, replaced by a collaborative board that actually followed their own bylaws. 3 years after the settlement, on a warm spring morning, I was doing my usual laps when I paused mid-pool and just floated for a moment. The sun was brilliant in the sky, the water was perfect, and I could hear birds calling in the desert landscape around my property. Everything was exactly as it should be. I had bought this land to have freedom and peace. I had built this pool to have a place to exercise and relax. I had fought to defend my rights when someone tried to take those things away from me, and in the end, I had won. Not just legally, but in the deeper sense of reclaiming my space and my peace of mind. The pool sparkled in the morning light, the infinity edge creating the illusion that the water extended forever into the desert horizon. It was beautiful and it was mine, purchased legally, built with proper permits and defended successfully in court. No one could take that away from me. I resumed my laps, feeling strong and content. The rhythm of swimming had always been meditative for me, and on that morning it felt especially meaningful. Each stroke was a celebration of having overcome adversity. Each breath was a reminder that I was exactly where I wanted to be, living exactly the life I had envisioned. When I finished my swim and pulled myself out of the pool, I stood for a moment on the deck, dripping water and looking out at the mountains. The property was quiet except for the gentle sound of the pool's filtration system and the occasional bird call. It was perfect. I went inside, showered, and got ready for my workday. I had a video conference scheduled with a potential new client, then several hours of coding work on an existing project. It was a normal day, blissfully free of drama or conflict. Just work that I enjoyed, in a home that I loved, with the freedom to take a swim break whenever I wanted. That evening, Rachel came over and we grilled dinner in the outdoor kitchen. We ate by the pool as the sun set, talking about her latest project and my business challenges. It was comfortable and easy, the kind of evening that makes you grateful for the life you've built. "I'm really glad you didn't let that crazy HOA lady run you off your property," Rachel said as we cleaned up after dinner. "This place is special." "Me too," I agreed. "It would have been easier to just give up and move somewhere else, but this was my home and she had no right to it." "Sometimes you have to fight for what's yours." "You did more than fight for it," Rachel said. "You proved that individuals can stand up to organizations and win, even when it seems like the odds are stacked against them. That's important." She was right. The experience had taught me that documentation, proper legal representation, and persistence could overcome even seemingly intractable problems. Patricia had seemed unstoppable at first, wielding her position as HOA president like a weapon. But in the end, the law was on my side, and that had been enough. As the months and years continued to pass, the entire incident faded further into memory. New challenges arose in my business and personal life, as they always do. But none of them involved HOAs or property disputes or false police reports. Those problems had been solved definitively, thanks to proper legal action and a willingness to stand my ground. I kept swimming every morning, kept working from my home office, kept improving my property bit by bit. The pool remained the centerpiece of everything, a daily reminder of why I had fought so hard to defend my rights. It wasn't just about the pool itself. It was about the principle that people should be able to enjoy their own property without harassment or interference, as long as they're following the law. The Desert Vista HOA became just another community organization in the area, no longer a source of stress or conflict in my life. I occasionally saw residents from the development at local businesses or events, and we would exchange polite nods or brief conversations. No drama, no tension, just neighbors coexisting peacefully. Robert Chambers and I became casual friends, meeting for coffee every few months to catch up. He seemed to genuinely enjoy hearing about my business success and property improvements, and I appreciated his updates on the HOA's progress. It was a relationship built on mutual respect and the shared experience of having dealt with a difficult situation. Looking back on everything that had happened, I felt proud of how I had handled it. I hadn't backed down or allowed myself to be bullied. I had documented everything, sought proper legal counsel, and pursued appropriate remedies through both the criminal and civil justice systems. The outcome had been exactly what it should have been: consequences for the person who had harassed me, compensation for my troubles, and legal protection going forward. The story could have ended very differently. If I had been less organized, less willing to spend money on attorneys, or less persistent in defending my rights, Patricia might have continued harassing me indefinitely. Other people in similar situations might have just given up and moved away, letting the bully win. But I had refused to be driven from my home, and that decision had made all the difference. The written apology from Patricia, tucked away in my file, represented more than just an acknowledgement that she had been wrong. It represented a victory for property rights, due process, and the principle that authority must be exercised lawfully and within proper boundaries. HOAs serve legitimate purposes when properly managed, but they don't get to claim jurisdiction over property they don't own or authority they don't possess. Years down the line, when I thought about the whole ordeal, what I remembered most wasn't the anger or frustration. It was the satisfaction of having stood up for myself successfully, and the peace that came from knowing my home was truly my own. The pool where it all started remained my favorite place on the property, a place of both relaxation and triumph. The morning swims continued, year after year, marking time in the most pleasant way possible. The water, the sunrise, the mountains in the distance. It was everything I had wanted when I bought this property, and thanks to my willingness to fight for it, it was everything I got to keep. Patricia Henderson and her delusional claims about HOA authority were nothing but a distant memory, a problem solved and put firmly in the past where it belonged. My story became one that I shared occasionally when the topic of HOAs came up in conversation. People were always shocked by Patricia's behavior and impressed that I had fought back successfully. Some asked for advice about their own HOA problems, and I was always happy to share what I had learned about documentation, legal representation, and the importance of knowing your rights as a property owner. But mostly, I just enjoyed my life and my property. The pool sparkled in the Arizona sun, the business thrived, and every morning began with that peaceful swim that reminded me why I had chosen this place and why I had fought to keep it. The story had a happy ending because I had made sure it would, and that was exactly how it should be.